Hello everyone, I'm here today to do a Read Around the World challenge video. I do this about every month where I choose a region of the world and read books from all the countries in that region, and this part is part 2 of the Caribbean islands because there are a lot of them. I couldn't read them all in one video. This is part 2 and it's going to be about the more southern islands of the Caribbean, so I would say smaller islands. And the first one is St. Kitts and Nevis. And for that one I read Only God Can Make a Tree by Bertram Roach. And this book is about a man that lives in St. Kitts and Nevis. He's from another, I don't remember exactly which island, maybe Montserrat, but he's from another island, but he lives there. And he's between there's like a love triangle in which this man loves a certain woman, but the daughter of one of the plantation owners, the white daughter of one of the plantation owners, likes him. So he decides to be with her for the prestige of it, but he still loves this other woman. So he's like with this white woman for a while until he can get the prestige and then go back to his other woman. And as you can imagine, that doesn't go his way, and there is a lot of issues. The man is horrible himself. I really didn't like this guy, but yeah, I didn't like the story so much because I think it was just so horrible, but it did give me a sense of the island, how it is to live in an island like that. So there is a lot of talk of him traveling to other islands, for example, and how that works, and also like the dynamics between black and colored and white people and the plantations, because even though slavery was not legal yet, I think it was around the time when slavery stopped being legal, there is still those dynamics that are there, and it's difficult to break them. So as I said, this black man, who I think it was the supervisor of the plantation, he still is lower because he's black, and he still expects the people that work in the plantation to be exploited, even if they're paid, but they're still exploited. So there's all these dynamics that we look at. So I think this book did give me a decent sense of what it is to live in this island, especially at that time. But I didn't particularly love the story just because this man was so horrible to both women. It is quite misogynistic in that sense. So yeah, that was the one that I read for St. Kitts and Nevis. Then the next country I read from is Grenada, and I read Pynter by Jacob Ross. And this is quite a long book about this boy called Pynter, who lives in this in the island, and he has very flawed family dynamics. He has a disability, and that puts him in a different position as compared to his brother, for example. And well, we see his relationship with his family, especially his brother, his uncle, his mom, and for me this one was kind of boring, to be honest. There's not much that happens. I think the writing was good, like the sentence to sentence level writing, and interestingly it also acknowledges Bernadine Evaristo in the acknowledgements, which was a fun random fact. But yeah, the story was not really that compelling. The characters were not super developed so that you are connected to them, and I don't necessarily mind books that have no plot, but they have to have something else to compensate for that, let's say, to make it compelling. And I think this one was just a very slow, kind of plotless book. I didn't think that the discussion about the characters or the relationships were particularly deep, and I also didn't think that the topics explored were particularly interesting to me. So this one was a little bit of a disappointment, to be honest. But the writing was good. So I would be willing to try something else from this author, probably something shorter. But yeah, it's something that I think will appeal to some people, just not my kind of book. And the next one I read was for Sint Maarten, and that was Love Songs Make You Cry by Lesana Sekou. And this was a short story collection. You might know that I don't particularly like short story collections. However, this one, the short stories were actually quite long. They were like 20-30 pages each, and there were only like 4 or 5 of them. And the stories are told as well in a very conversational, very casual way. So it almost felt like a friend telling you something that happened in their life, and that makes sense to be a shorter thing, because when a friend tells you a story, it's normally not a 5-hour, 6-hour conversation. It's a maybe half an hour or an hour. So this is how this book felt like. It was someone telling you a story of something that happened to them. So I actually enjoyed this format for this book. Also, I think it does give you a good sense of Sint Maarten. So I was very pleasantly surprised by this book. I have other Lesana Sekou books in my want to read radar, not TBR, but in my radar, but they are a little bit difficult to get hold of. So I don't know if I will be able to read more, but I am interested in more of her stuff. Then for Antigua and Barbuda, I have counted Mr. Loverman by Bernadine Evaristo as my read for Antigua and Barbuda, just because it's something I have read and it does connect to, even if Bernadine Evaristo does not come from there, I think her roots, a part of her family roots are from there, and Mr. Loverman does follow a man from Antigua that moves to the UK. So I have decided to count it for it. And to be honest, I read this a while ago and I didn't particularly enjoy it. I know a lot of people love it, so it's a me thing. And I didn't love it just because I think that Mr. Loverman, the main character, is very misogynistic. And I know that some people can go past that, and I understand that that's not the view of Bernadine Evaristo, but I still didn't want to listen to the rants of this misogynistic man. But yeah, Mr. Loverman is a gay man that is very unhappily married, and also has a long-time friend and lover that he meets with in a regular basis, and he's struggling. He's an older man, so he's struggling with the new gay rights movement. He's used to how his life works, and he wants it to continue that way. Also, his relationship with his wife is still deteriorating as well. So we follow those different kinds of things. But yeah, the way that he talks about his wife and about women in general, it bothered me too much to enjoy this book. But as I said, I am aware that Bernadine Evaristo is not from Antigua and Barbuda, so I do intend to read something from an author that is actually from Antigua and Barbuda. I just didn't have time this time around, but it's in my TBR, it's in my want to read list very much, and that is Small Place by Jamaica Kincaid. And Jamaica Kincaid is a very famous author from Antigua, and I believe that this book, it's about the tourist industry in that island, and it sounds amazing and I want to read it. I just didn't have the time. But yeah, if you're looking for something else from Antigua and Barbuda, that probably is a good choice to start with. And from Dominica, I have read Why Sagasso by Jen Rees, and I have read this a long time ago, so my memory might be a little bit fuzzy about it, but this one is about the other woman in Jane Eyre. So if you're not aware, in Jane Eyre, spoilers for Jane Eyre, there is the man, Mr. Rochester, is it his name? He fancies Jane Eyre, but he has an actual wife that he thinks she's crazy and keeps in the attic. So this story is about this woman, the woman in the attic, that and her story and how she came to be where she was. So in this story, she is from the Caribbean, and she kind of, the point of the book is that she became crazy because of the colonial abuses that she suffered from. And yeah, that's basically kind of the point of the book. It's very short, so it's interesting to read. I think it was interesting for me. I didn't particularly enjoy the writing style, but I think overall it was a decent story to read, and if you like Jane Eyre, probably this is up your alley. Then for St. Lucia, I read White Egrets by Derek Walcott, which is a poetry collection. Again, I'm not super into poetry, I just don't think I understand it that well. But in this case, I think this is very approachable poetry. What I would say is that this poetry is very focused on when the author went to Europe. So he does compare St. Lucia with Europe and the nature, especially. There is a lot of nature writing in his poetry, and he compares the two things and how the colonial powers made St. Lucia poorer, but Europe benefited from that, and he struggles inside between the appreciation of some of the art that he sees in Europe and the knowledge that that art came from a place of abuse from other people. So yeah, it was an interesting collection. I don't think it's particularly representative from the country, but I think that if you are not so into poetry, this is quite approachable, I would say, and it still has some interesting things to say. If you have any other books from St. Lucia that you know and I might like, let me know, because I would like to read something more representative of the country. Then for Barbados, I actually have read two books that I've read before. Well, at least one of them is from actual Barbados, and the other one is kind of similar to Bernadine Evaristo. The author has connections with the island, and part of the book is in the island, but it's not overtly rooted in Barbados. So the first book is How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House by Cherie Jones, which was nominated for the Women's Prize a couple of years ago, and that's why I read it. And this is quite a brutal book about this girl that is the help in a house in Barbados, and how she is abused. She is abused quite graphically and quite brutally, and it basically looks at what abuse does to her, and how the dynamics of that abuse work in the country. I thought it was a little bit needlessly violent. Like, I don't particularly mind violence in books if it has a point, but I didn't feel like this book justified all that violence that was graphically shown in the book. But yeah, again, I think it's a book that a lot of people loved, and I think it's a book that does have some interesting things to say, so I still recommend. It's just maybe not the best book I've ever read. The other book that I wanted to talk about is Washington Black by Essie Edugen, and she is a Canadian writer, but I think her family does have roots in Barbados. And Washington Black starts in Barbados as a setting. So Washington Black is actually a fun book, adventure book kind of thing, who was nominated for the Booker a few years ago as well. And that's when I kind of read it, when a lot closer to when it came out. And it follows this boy who was a slave, and the brother of the slave plantation comes to visit, and he finds out that he is very talented in drawing, and he wants to bring him with him when he travels around the world looking for new animal species and things like that, because he needs someone to illustrate the new species that he's finding. So it starts in Barbados when these two people meet, and then they basically travel the world, and it focuses a lot in the relationship between these two people, and how even though the the man thinks that he's doing a good thing, there is still this slave white savior kind of dynamics, and that Washington Black, which is the boy, he doesn't like that, and he recognizes that, and he tries to fight it. And it's a little bit of that dynamic, how we think that we are being good, but we still within our own box of prejudices. So yeah, I would recommend, maybe not exactly for Barbados if you're more strict with these rules, but it's still a really good book. Then the next book I read was for St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and that's The Moon is Following Me by Cecil Browne. And this was another collection of short stories. And as I said, short stories are not particularly my thing, but this was quite humorous, and it was fun to read. It was just fun to read. And it also had a fairly strong sense of place, so I also appreciated that. However, I have to say it's not particularly memorable. I think I read it about 2 months ago, and I don't remember any of the stories anymore. So it's not particularly memorable, but I think it is still fun to read. Then for Trinidad and Tobago, I have read quite a few books from there. Well, I have read 4 books from there, I think. The first one is The House of Mr Biswas by Naipul, and this one I think won the Booker at some point, and I think the author might have also won the Nobel Prize. I'm not sure, but The House of Mr Biswas is a book following Mr Biswas, who is a middle-aged man that is struggling with life, with work, and he's basically a little bit of a liar. And yeah, he just lies to people and thinks that he's like better than he is, and yeah, we basically follow him trying to find new jobs and trying to figure out his life in this context. I did find it a little bit dragging. I think that it could have been a lot shorter, but there are some interesting things that I appreciated, basically. So it's a middle of the ground thing for me. There is a lot of race dynamics, because in Trinidad and Tobago there is quite a big Indian rooted population. There is also a lot of African descendants, and there is also white people, European descendants. So all those groups do interact in different ways, and it's kind of interesting to see how. And actually most of the books that I have read for Trinidad and Tobago that do deal with this kind of dynamics. The other one that I read is Golden Child by Claire Adam, and Golden Child is about a pair of twins. One of them, his parents think that he's very smart and he's very well behaved and all that, and the other one, it's more they have a more difficult relationship with the parents, so he does run away at some point, and it is about, as a parent, the feelings that you would have if that happens, and yeah, like the relationship with both of them, how it changes, and how all of this affects the relationship, basically. I'm not doing a very good job at describing that, but I read it a while ago, so yeah. But yeah, this one, I think it does have some value to it. It's not my favorite book of all time, so take with that what you want. Then I also read House of Ashes by Monique Roffey, and this one follows a failed coup in Trinidad and Tobago, and we see, so the people that were trying to make the coup happen did go to the parliament, and then they were stuck there, and we kind of follow the few days that they are stuck in the parliament before they are neutralized, let's say. Yeah, this was interesting to see the dynamics in a more bluntly political way, and what at least the author thought that was the problems with the government, and why anyone would want to do a coup. And also it has some family relationships going on of the people that decide to make this coup, and when they are stuck in there and it didn't go as planned. So yeah, that one is more of a plotty book, I would say, which is not a bad thing, but it's something to consider. And then the other one that I read for Trinidad and Tobago is The Bread the Devil Knead by Lisa Allen-Agostini, which was also in the Women's Prize this year. And this book was fine. This is about a middle-aged woman, I think in her 40s, or she just turned 40, something like that, that she's a manager of a shop, and she has seemingly a fairly stable life, but her husband is very abusive to her, but she doesn't want to leave her husband. So it's about that dynamic. It's also, there is a person that comes to town at some point, and she feels a lot of things in her childhood are revealed and come up to the surface again, and makes her rethink and reevaluate a lot of things in her life. I felt like there were a bit too many stories going on, and I think that I know a lot of people love this book, but for me it was just the topics and the themes were not particularly special, and they were not treated in any particular special way. So for me it was fine. Like it didn't do anything wrong, but it just didn't do anything particularly impressive either, if that makes sense. So yeah, those are the books that I have read from Trinidad and Tobago. And there is the two little islands that were part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, but I think they are considered their own country at the moment. I am not completely sure how that situation is going on, but yeah, I think that they are listed as countries, but they are still part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. I don't know. Aruba is the first one, and I read Zoutstraat by Dennis Henriquez. I read this in Dutch, so bear with the fact that my Dutch is not my best language, so I might not have gotten all of it from this book, and I also don't know if this has been translated to English or any of the books from Dennis Henriquez, which was the main author that I found for Aruba. But Zoutstraat is a book about this street in Oranjestad, which is the capital of Aruba, and the different people in the street. It's kind of like the small little things kind of book. At the beginning it almost felt like short stories, because we followed a few different people from the street that felt like completely independent, but then they come together, and we see a lot about the day-to-day life and the dreams of these people. Like one of these kids that live in the street wanted to emigrate and make a better life for himself, and we see how the people in the street take that idea, that kind of thing. It's a very short book. It's like 100 pages, and it was fine. For me it was fine. There is another one of his books that is called Hesterven van Rebecca Lopez Icario, that I thought it sounded more like something I would want to read, but it is a lot longer. It's like 400 pages, and I just didn't feel like reading 400 pages in Dutch at the moment I was reading these books. So I decided not to read it now, but I will be interested to read it in the future. And then the last book that I read for this challenge is the book for Curaçao. That was The House of Six Doors by Patricia Salbert. And this book is sort of an autobiographical memoir fiction thing. It's one of those autofiction things, so names are changed, but the story is very similar to the author's story. And this is about this girl that when she was, I think, 12, 13, her mom moved them to America, and her mom was very unstable. She had very severe depressive episodes, and she also made very rash decisions about things like that. Like she had tried to move from Curaçao to, I think, Venezuela, Colombia, several other countries before, because she was convinced that she needed to be rich to be happy, and she couldn't be rich in Curaçao. So at the end, like, this book starts when they moved to the US, and this girl really reminisces a lot in Curacao, and the good things about Curacao and the good things that she likes. And she has a very special relationship with her grandmother, who she misses very much. So we see this girl struggling in the US, and also we see a lot of the Curacao life. So I will say that half of the book is about her struggles in the US, and half of the book is about her previous life in Curacao, the things that she likes about Curacao, the misconceptions that people have about the place, her relationship with her grandmother, all those kind of things based in Curacao, which was my favorite parts of the book, the ones that looked at actually Curacao, and also the relationship with the Netherlands as a country, because many of these people have Dutch passports because it was part of the Netherlands, and they have a Dutch education. A lot of them go to the Netherlands to study, which is something that I know happens because I have seen them in my classes. People from Curacao, it's quite common. And how that is not understood in the US as well, that even though they are a Caribbean island, they are connected to the Netherlands, and they have Dutch passports and Dutch educations, and they do speak a mixture of Dutch and Spanish and Papiamento, and that's all. Like, there was actually a lot of, in all of these books, there was a lot of Spanish speaking inadvertently. Like, most of these countries, Spanish is not the main language in there. Like Curacao and Aruba is Dutch, and a lot of the other ones is English, but they all have some Spanish sparkle here and there, which was interesting to watch how that dynamic, like the language dynamic, works. So yeah, I think I enjoy The House of Six Doors. I think that the writing didn't feel particularly special. I think that the author is a journalist, maybe, so it's not super literary, but it does its job. I particularly didn't care so much about the depression of the mother, who plays a big role in the story, but I did like the parts about Curacao a lot, and I think it's still a worthy book to talk about when we talk about Curacao. So yeah, those are all the books that I have read from all the little islands in the Caribbean. If you have any recommendations for any of the other countries, let me know. It will be great to know more recommendations. And until next video, bye!